Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.
And a jolly good morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo and broadcasting live on TV1, part of course of the Capital Maharaja Group. And this morning we have got with us Professor Siri Hettige from the University of Colombo to talk to us about what we can do. What can we do? Let's find out. Very good morning to you, Professor.
Good morning.
Professor, thank you very much for coming here. You've got a wonderful background and so on. And you are the Emeritus Professor of Sociology.
That's right.
At the University of Colombo. I'm very grateful for you coming along here. And tell me, there's all sorts of things happening and not happening. Lots of things appear not to be happening. The people's discontent is continuing. Prices are up, protests going on, lots of people, various groups, new groups are being formed to agitate or to be an activist sort of thing on various issues. Why is all that happening? What's going on? Why are people so challenged at the moment?
I think it's a matter of degree. I think it is a very common phenomenon these days. Wherever you go around the world, you see an increasing discontent among people, and of course, it varies from place to place, country to country. In some countries, you have much less discontent, and in others, you have a lot more. And I think in Sri Lanka, we have a situation where discontent has been part of our landscape, social landscape for quite some time. And there's a background to it, and I think we really have a situation where discontent is growing. And it's partly due to the fact that we tend to really concentrate too much on politics and to rely too much on political actors to manage the public affairs of this country. I think there are, certainly we cannot really devalue the importance of political actors and political institutions, political processes, but at the same time we should also accept the fact that in societies there's also a thing called division of labor. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's why you have a diversity of institutions. If you take the political institutions in Sri Lanka, we say that we have a three-tier system. We have local government, we have a provincial administration, and then you have a central government. Why do we have three tiers? Because we want to have a division of labor based on what we call the subsidiarity principle. If you can do something at the local level, you don't pass it on to the next level, because it is closer to people, it is easily managed, and it is done better at a local level. Say for instance, managing your local environment, you see physical environment, you cannot do it from Colombo. If you go to a village, and the village natural environment has to be taken care of by the people in those areas. You cannot manage it from Colombo. It's true that we have national institutions, like for instance the Central Environment Authority. Why? Because we want to have national policies on environmental management. We want to have national standards and so on and so forth. That's why we have a national level institution called the CEA. So you have a parliament, you have a provincial council, you have local government. Now why? In a situation where you have local government, you have provincial administration, what are we supposed to do at a national level? Not to go around and meddle with local affairs. And I see...
I hear what you say, but I want to just bring what you say into a real life situation. Now, in Mount Lavinia, we've got the David Mount Lavinia Council, and there are buildings that are being built. It's now going vertical. So along small roads you find big buildings, maybe 16 stories, and so on. Right? Now then, apparently this has been approved by the local authority. But then we have somebody from Central, which is in the form of the UDA, who've turned up there and said, oh, hello, excuse me, this is terribly dangerous, you can't be doing this. You can only do 8 stories, and you need to stop. Now, the promoter, the owner, the developer, that's it. The developer says, well, no, hang on, I got permission from the local council. They said I can do 16. I ain't going to stop. So, who's right here?
No, I think we are mixing up 2 different things.
Yeah.
One is giving a permit to construct a building, and then regulating building construction in a particular region.
Be talking.
I don't think that there has to be a congruence between what happens at a national level.
Yeah.
You see, I said that Central Environmental Authority is essentially a regulatory authority. It is a regulatory authority. But when you take a local council, it is not a regulatory authority as such. It is a, the point I'm trying to make here is that we have to maintain certain national standards, and that's why we have national statutes. We have national, standards, and we have national institutions. So the national institutions have to guide local institutions to fall in line with the national, standards, national rules and regulations and so on. I mean, as you know, one of the critical functions of a government is to regulate. If regulate public affairs. Public order is possible only if you have a regulatory framework. Otherwise, people do different things, in different places and so on and so forth, and you will have the chaos that you have. So the point is that, there are standards that, for instance, there is a division between public space and private space. Now you have to, this is a very, very important distinction. Public space is so critical for quality of life of the people. You can't be just locked in your own house, not to have access to public spaces around your house. Imagine if you don't have a place to walk, if you don't have a place where you could meet other people and sit and chat and so on. I mean, that is where you have to make this distinction between public. So, for instance, there was a rule that you have to leave, if you are going to build, let's say, a multi-story complex, you have to have certain space set aside as public space. I am told that it's about 1/3 of the land area. Now when you have 1/3 of the land area left out as a public space, which the people can turn into anything they like. They can turn that into a children's playground, they can make it a public park, or they can make whatever they like, So the point is, again, of course, you have to decide, how you are going to use the public space. No, so the point is that this is a regulatory function that is so critical for public order and quality of life. At the end of the day, what are we talking about? We don't want chaos. We don't want anarchy. We want public order. But at the same time, public order has to also facilitate, the improvement of quality of life. Say, if you can maintain the distinction between public and private space, you basically regulate the things that you are talking about. Where can you build, what can you build, how can you build. You have to not only look at your own building, you have to look at the buildings around you. Say, for instance, now someone might have moved into this neighborhood 30 years ago, when there was no such thing. You see, and you have a perspective when you go to your front yard. You see a open area in front of you. But if somebody comes and builds, let's say a 10-story apartment complex in front of your house, with a blind wall, you are completely locked in. You become a prisoner in no time. So, but the point is, that is why. But
is that evolution? Is that the way things evolve?
No,
because now, for example, exactly what you're saying. My view of the ocean's gone.
Yeah, that's
Instead, I've got 3 apartment blocks to gaze at.
That's right.
So I can admire the architecture instead of the Indian Ocean now.
That's right. But I think there will always be kind of you have to give and take.
Yes.
I mean, there will always be certain compromises that you have to make. But the point is that there has to be a limit, and who is going to set the limits? I think it is normally what happens is that you come to some understanding as to what is better for everybody. For instance, one should not gain at the expense of the others. I mean, I should not deprive what you have for me to have what I want. I think that kind of understanding, mutual, understanding, give and take, I think is critical for quality of life.
But
because otherwise...
Sorry, Professor. Do you think that our legislators, our politicians of the day, do they understand what the people want?
Well, actually, I really cannot answer that question.
Yeah. No, because it's a little bit wide. What I'm saying is, if they did, why would the people have to protest and agitate and so on and so forth? It appears to me that there's a mismatch between what the people need and want.
I see, in modern democracies, mature democracies, public opinion on almost everything is gauged on a regular basis. It's not just having an election today and another election in 5 years' time, and in between, you don't want to be in the dark. You should know the changing attitudes of the people, changing perceptions of the people, changing ideas of the people. So the point is that there is a need to really generate information as to what the people feel, what the people think. So this is what we call public opinion. Now, public opinion surveys are very critical for people to know, especially the politicians, to know what the people think about actions and maybe, as you said, inactions as well. So the point is that in this country, we have not been able to establish this tradition. When I was about 30 years ago, 20 years ago, I started doing something like this. Like, for instance, I have been doing national surveys on youth. And I do a very scientific kind of a survey using a representative sample of young people drawn from around the country, and you get a perspective from the point of view of young people in the country. That is really very useful for us to take decisions at a national level. But unfortunately in this country, we have not been able to really use the data that we generate for decision making, policy making, and as a result, many people have given up on doing. I don't see many public opinion surveys being published in the newspapers these days. The reason might be that the people might have given up. Why do you generate data if the data is not being looked at and made use of by the people who matter? So that might be, but I think it's a gap, and I think that gap is preventing us from understanding why people are really having this kind of
and have you ever felt in your long career, have you sort of felt sometimes that when you've generated a report and handed it in, later on do you get the feeling, oh God, they haven't done anything about this?
Absolutely. I think in about 90% of the cases I have been disappointed, 90%.
Right.
But in about 10% of the cases I have been very happy, because I have been able to really influence decision making based on the data that we have generated and collected. Now I'll give an example. Now, for instance, the Southern Expressway. I was responsible for doing the social impact assessment.
Right.
And with the report that I prepared, we were able to even change some design aspects of the Southern Expressway. For instance, some of the underpasses and some of the overpasses were added to the design because we pointed this out. Okay. So that was possible. And then also we came up with the National Involuntary Resettlement Policy for the country based on that survey, social impact assessment. And in fact, we have the most generous package for people who are displaced by development projects today because of that. In 2000, and this was in 2000.
That's an interesting point. After the break, I'm going to ask you how that has helped or not helped the people in the Uma Oya project area. Yeah. Don't go away. After all, this is Newsline. We'll be right. And welcome back to Newsline, where we're having a rather interesting conversation with Professor Siri Hettige, who's a Professor of Emeritus, Professor of Sociology, University of Colombo. Now then, you've just told me about this this national policy to deal with involuntary resettlements. Now that's very interesting, and you said that you developed this whilst you were working on the proposal for the Southern Expressway. Now, what about these people in the Uma Oya project area? I've been there, Professor, and sometimes it's really heart-rending. There's one lady, she must be, I think she's over 80 now, but her whole house disappeared into the earth, quite literally. And she was lucky that she was not there at that moment. She was just in the garden. And this whole thing just collapsed right in. This is just, I've taken one example. And I know that when they built the Assam, the dams in Egypt and so on all those years ago, same sort of thing. They even lost the temple of Abu Simbel, had to be relocated and so on, because in the name of progress. And so be it in the Umayyad area. But there are loads of people who are still suffering. They haven't been rehoused, they haven't been given lands to, the lands that they were cultivating has got no water in some places now because it's all been diverted. They understand that they need to be part of progress, but they themselves are not being looked after. But this national policy seems to be a jolly good idea. Have the government forgotten about that?
Well, you see, the point is that this national involuntary resettlement policy has not been turned into a law.
Oh,
it is a policy, and the policy can be followed by the agency that provide the funding for a particular project. Now, I do not know exactly how this thing has been worked out in the case of Umayyad. But on the other hand, in many other cases where this involuntary resettlement policy has been applied, we have been able to avoid a lot of the problems that the people face. I'll give an example. Now, when you have a very generous compensation package, people are not necessarily happy to move because you like to live where you are, but nevertheless, sometimes you are compelled to move. But on the other hand, if you are given, all the necessary support for you to move out and settle down and lead a decent life thereafter, then you might agree to move. Now, this is exactly what I am talking about. It is always, better to stay where you are. But on the other hand, if you have to move out, you have to have a better deal to move out, so that you can say, well, I moved out, I moved away from my, familiar surrounding, but at the same time, I am now moving into an area where I get the basic facilities, and so on and so forth. Now, this is what we call the build back better. Now, this is a widely accepted principle in, so many areas, like for instance, the displacement and resettlement. Now, so what I'm getting at is that, we have to, do the work, in a decent way. For instance, we are coming from different disciplines, and we have what are called professional ethics. We have to do our, research in an ethical manner. And we don't really give in to vested interest. In fact, when the Southern Expressway was being considered, I expressed my opinion against the Southern Expressway. I basically, felt that there was a better option for us. My point of view at that time was that we should electrify the railway that we have from Colombo to Mahatara. If you have an express railway line, electrified express railway line, you will be able to move any number of people, at very high speed. You will not be able to, you will not have the same problem as you have, when you have to transport people in, rickety buses and so on. And the second, of course, is Southern Gold Road can be widened, and you can widen the Gold Road, and you can have more space on Gold Road, which means that, you basically take the pressure off, the Gold Road by having, good railway connection between Colombo and Madras. So the two would have been complementary, and there would not have been a need for a Southern Expressway, because the cost of the Southern Express has been enormous in every sense of the term. But anyway, that was done. So then of course, we had to accept the fact that it was going to be built for whatever the reason, and we wanted to really make the situation better for the people, and that is how we came up with this idea of giving the best possible options for people to move, whether they want to live closer, whether they want to move, further apart, and so on and so forth. So I think I pointed this out at the beginning, that in about 10% of the cases where I have been able to, contribute, we have been able to make a difference. I think that is a fact. And I can give examples. I don't want to take time to explain those things. Maybe some other time we can do that. But in about 90% of the cases, we have not been able to really influence decision making at a national. I'll give an example. Now, to 1998, I was a member of the Presidential Commission on Local Government Reform. We came up with a very comprehensive report, over 300 pages. And all the recommendations that you required to revamp the local government system in the country, I would say, were there. Now, had we implemented all the recommendations that we came out with, it was hard work. A very competent group of people, came together and, worked very hard for one whole year. Went around the country, consulted, international experts. And, but the point is that we have not been able to really make full use of that particular report. Now, as a result, where are we now with the local government today in the country? Now, people are talking about, having a mess in the local government sector.
It certainly looks like a mess to us.
But the point is this, legislation is the main function of Parliament. What else? Parliament is supposed to, now there are statutes which are 150 years old. There are now, our education bill was passed by the legislature in 1944, and it is still valid. Now the point is that this particular,
it's still reflective of the changed needs and the changed.
No, I think the point. This is exactly the point. Now you have to update legislation in keeping with the changing time. There's no question about it. But the point is that there are certain principles which are still valid, and those valid principles have to be retained. Now about this public and private space, distinction that I made, that is sacrosanct. You cannot
mess with that.
You built environment. Has to maintain this distinction between public and private space. People should be able to go from private to public and vice versa. And that is really what quality of life is all about. You want to have your privacy, but at the same time you also want to move out and mingle with other people. You meet other people in the neighborhood and so on and so forth. But then the moment you are tired, you want to withdraw into your room and lock your door and have a nap.
I've got two questions in the last 3-4 minutes of the program. One is from a viewer who says, is the unrest we are witnessing a result of a disenchantment with democracy? Is democracy a failed concept?
Absolutely not, because we do not see any other option to democracy. Because what is the alternative in Sri Lanka? Is it that
that all these disparate parties get together and agree on something and get on with it, or what?
No,
what is it?
I think the problem is not with democracy. It is with political culture.
Right.
You know our political, now say there are well functioning democracies that have really support civilized life. And it depends not only on democracy, it also depends on how the state operates and how the state functions and how the state facilitates policy development and the implementation of policies and so on. I mean, I travel around the world, and I have been in countries where you have not only functioning democracies, you have also very manage public systems. Say for instance, if you take I lived in Finland for one whole year. I was teaching in one of the universities during my sabbatical, and I lived in Switzerland for 1 year during one of my sabbaticals, and I have lived in Germany. I have
how does it work in Switzerland?
No, the point is this. I mean, those are living democracies.
Yeah.
And the democracy is not only operating at a superficial level. It is also a democracy which is very deep. It really, what we call the deepening of democracy is as important as having democracy at a national level, as by way of governments, by way of national institutions, and so on and so forth. So the point is that you have to really bring the vertical linkage between the local and the national, very in an effective way. For instance, people should be able to participate in decision making at a local level. That is possible. Where they delegate certain functions to higher authorities, like for instance the provincial administration. People cannot participate at a provincial level, but they can certainly participate at a local level. Now, say in India, 93rd Amendment of the Constitution basically helped revamp the local government system there, and the Panchayat Raj system really, really 93rd Amendment to the Constitution, right? So the point that I'm trying to make here is that the people's participation in local government is very critical, and the report that I mentioned, 1998 report, has a chapter on people's participation in local government. And I want to say this, and I contributed a great deal to writing of that chapter, along with a couple of other people. But then also there is another chapter called New Vision for Local Government in Sri Lanka. Now the question is, if you are in the local government sector, the first thing you have to do is to read all the legislation that governs your sector. Now I do not know how many of our local, newly elected local government representatives have read the relevant legislation. Starting from the Pradeshiya Sabha Act. If you read the Pradeshiya Sabha Act, and if you act according to the Pradeshiya Sabha Act, a lot of the problems that the people face in this country can be solved.
And on that note, Professor Siri Hettige, I must thank you. We've run out of time, but there was one question here, which if you can answer very quickly, and that is, somebody's asking whether you regret having served on the Police Commission.
Well, not really. I actually, basically set the standards within a very short period of time for us to follow. But on the other hand, everybody knows what really happened. But the point is, setting standards is so critical for us. I think whether we are in a position to really adhere to those standards and follow those standards and bring about change according to those standards, that is a different issue. But I think it is very critical for us to set the standards so that you can say where you are. Otherwise you do not know. Nothing is absolute. Everything is relative. Brief history of time, Stephen Hawking. I mean, that shows how insignificant we are as human beings. You see, the point is, we think that we have our ego, we think that we are big and so on and so forth, but we are the most insignificant lot, on this planet.
But your contribution to us this morning has been very significant. Thank you very much, Professor Siri Hettige. We appreciate your presence. We'll have you back on the program. There's so much more to discuss.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And that's the way it was on Newsline.
It's a pleasure.
That's the way it was on Newsline today on Friday. We look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Take care and God bless.
News First, Newsline with Hettige Professor